Hello, and welcome to this next part in my video series on being and time. This time I'm going to be talking about the chapter 3 of part 2, which is called The Authentic Potentiality-for-Being-a-Whole of Dasein and Temporality as the Ontological Meaning of Care. And I'll see if I can say something about this chapter. And I will want to say first something about or repeat something from the previous chapter, this concept of resoluteness. So resoluteness was about recognizing your guilt, the guilt that, or the indebtedness of your being from where you came from, in a very broad existential sense, and also the openness of your possibilities of your future through that which is revealed in anxiety, that there is this arbitrariness to how things are and how they could be. So resoluteness is to recognize both of these conditions of your being. But Heidegger wants to introduce another concept, going from resoluteness to anticipatory resoluteness. And this is going to be the condition for Dasein to realize its most extreme possibilities, as he puts it. So being anticipatory, that means essentially means the recognition of your death. It means the recognition of your death as your death in particular, not a death in general, but the fact that your very being will end at some point. And it's not a brooding over it. It's not a being sad about it and thinking about how you're going to die, but just recognizing that as he puts it, the possibility of your absolute end of possibilities. And that's going to do a lot of things for Heidegger, this recognizing of your death. That is actually going to be the key for you to become an authentic human being, or authentic Dasein, I should say. And it also is the way for Dasein to actually become itself, and not a they-self as it is most of the time. Because the recognition of your death, as in your own specific death, again, not this generalized death that happens to everyone, but your death in particular, to Heidegger, that is the point where Dasein realizes that it is something that is actually not the others, that is individualized and separate from the they. So it is through death that you sort of become an individual, maybe you could say. Although I don't think Heidegger would use that. I don't think he uses that word specifically. So recognizing your death is also a way that, your death is in your future. That we grasp. We grasp that you are, death is something that will happen to you inevitably, and it is coming to you from the future. And then grasping that from the future, that is going to then transform the way that Dasein, Dasein's perspective on itself, maybe, or the way that it realizes its possibilities and its being in a new way. Although it's, I find it most easy to think about, instead of thinking of grasping, this unique death, but say, if it would have been death in general, if we would have imagined a being which was immortal, for example, that knew that it was immortal and that it had freedom, meaning that it could diverge into new possibilities, and through a potentially endless time could explore every possibility for that being. It doesn't put a lot of stress on you, you could say. You have time to do whatever, to explore all the different ways that you could be. But once you realize that, well, no, I will have there's a finite amount of my existence, that suddenly makes you realize that I don't have all these possibilities really. I only have so many. And given that I will end someday, I might prioritize some possibilities over others. It will restructure the way that you think about yourself. And not only about the possibilities in your future. Of course, those are your possibilities always in the future. But that will also allow you to grasp your past, actually. Because again, in this example of an immortal being, it doesn't you could argue that an immortal being with freedom is not concerned about its past, because it has because it has forever to change. I mean, if it has failed at something in the past, it doesn't matter, because it could try it again and again an infinite number of times. But once you realize that, well, your future is finite, then you also realize that you would see more clearly like your constraints that come from your past, you could say. So that is one thing, that you realize, you grasp that you are limited by your past and your history, and so that becomes more explicitly your past, your having been, to go back to Heidegger's language. But not only is it restricting your past, but it also apparently allows you to reinterpret it and appropriate it in a new way. And I guess this only makes most sense when you think about the move away from being a they self to a your self, in that you could move away from the common they self interpretation of your past, and you're actually, through being your own person, you're allowed to reinterpret your past, not in your own way. I wouldn't say however you wish, but in an authentic way, perhaps. And so this individuation is also an important part of this chapter, or the self is part of this chapter, because the self is the starting point for Heidegger when he wants to explore the unity of care. How can we grasp the phenomenon of care as a unit, as a unity? What is it that holds the whole thing together? This whole structure of being ahead of and being with others and being engaged with beings in the world with handy things, caring about stuff. And the most obvious answer is that what brings us all together is that everything happens to a self. It is a self that is at the center of everything that cares, and that is at the center of everything that's happening to the self. But Heidegger will eventually go on to reject this interpretation or this answer, partly because we are mostly not this self, we are mostly the they self. So all this structure is not it seems that it's not dependent on being this authentic self, but another type of self, which is, well, it's like a collective self of some sort. And to Heidegger, it's more that the self is actually dependent on the care structure. It's not that it's not the other way around. So instead, for Heidegger, what is holding holding care together is that which he calls temporality. And temporality is his special way of talking about time, in that it's not this normal, vulgar conception of time, but this way of time that is related to Dasein, the being of Dasein. And so he wants to say, or he says that in his language, that the meaning of care is temporality. But then we have to remind ourselves that meaning in Heidegger's language means something different than what we're used to. In this context, Heidegger actually uses meaning to say what is the structure that allows for this thing to have to be intelligible, to appear for us. I know that in the introduction to Being and Time, they bring up an example of where things don't, or I would say, it brings up an example of why the word theater is given no meaning by physics. It has no, the meaning of, you would say that the meaning of theater is not physics, because the structure of physics does not allow you to grasp what a theater is. Meanwhile, well, the structure of physics allows you to grasp what force or gravity or electricity, I guess. So there is this structure, temporality, which allows care to become accessible to us. And it kind of makes sense, because we already said that care is tied up in this time-coded language. In the beginning, I already said that care is characterized by being ahead of itself. Obviously, like projecting into the future and caring about. In a way, it's almost like too obvious. Like the structure of caring about things involves like a time scale. Oh, no, but that is not the time that Heidegger wants to use, but that it would involve time in some sort. So that's how we can say such a complicated thing as the meaning of care is temporality. There's something else I wanted to say. Oh yeah, about this temporality again. It might be at this point that I don't know if this is the only time. I haven't really been able to figure that out. If it's the only time Heidegger does this, it could very well be, but I don't think it's emphasized as strongly as here. That Heidegger rejects that we could say that this temporality, this structure, that it is instead of saying that temporality is, he wants to say that temporality temporalizes itself into three ecstasies. And it's also sounds very complicated, and like what are you adding or trying to do with removing, like changing this language? And I've sort of come to the conclusion that what he's trying to do overall is to get being away from the idea of being as thing, being as entity, like thinking of beings that way, almost like an object, while temporality is a dynamic structure. I don't know if I completely buy that, because it's still like perfectly, we still feel that it's perfectly valid. Even before like reading Being in Time, we still use the word is for structures and processes. We could still, take a view like from a distance and view this dynamic thing still within some boundaries and call it an entity. But anyways, Heidegger wants to emphasize that no, this thing, temporality, is not, it temporalizes. That's just how he rolls. And another thing that maybe it's, I don't know how interesting it is really, but he brings up this the idea of negativity, or the negative in opposition to what he calls being. This, I guess, absence of being, or in that somehow I think we are primarily encountering like non-being as Dasein, and that encounter with non-being sort of propels us towards beings in a kind of reactionary way, but that the movement isn't that we first discover beings and then negate them or see their absence, but that the encountering the negative is primary for Heidegger. I'm not sure exactly why or what the implications would be. And I'm also pretty sure that Heidegger don't think that this negative is not something that we experience, and there's no doesn't seem to be any like phenomenal description of what the negative is. It's something that is sort of alluded to in certain moods. This mood called dread, but again, not to experience it directly. But no, I think that's all I can say really on this chapter. I'm beginning to approach the end slowly, very slowly, but surely. But if you have stuck around so far, and hopefully you will continue to do so. Anyways, thanks for watching.